On tonight's episode of Mr. Norris's In Case You Missed It, we look at the life and times of Frederick Douglass. From slave to escaping to freedom to speaking out for the abolitionist movement, we look at one of America's greatest heroes. Hey, hi, hello, and what is up, everybody? It's your host, Mr. Norris, the history teacher with the good hair, and my buddy Chance here. Say hi, buddy. Okay, he looks very confused. Okay, you can go play. Go play. To be honest with you, I ran out of dance moves, so I had to grab the dog at the beginning of the video. What is up, everybody? Tonight, we're going to be talking about Frederick Douglass, literally one of my favorite people in history that I discussed in U.S. History 1. He is insanely inspirational, insanely revolutionary as far as the African-American community goes, and just the American community. And like I said, literally one of my favorite people that I get to talk about in U.S. History 1. So let's dive right into it. Frederick Douglass was actually born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey in 1818 in Maryland. And his early life, again, let me just pause for a second here. I'm going to give the abridged version of the life of Frederick Douglass. So I'm not going to go into every single little detail. So internet trolls out there that are like, you missed this fact. You don't know anything. Just relax, okay? Calm down. Eat some pizza rolls. Get out of your mom's basement. It's fine. Okay. So anyways, he's born in 1818 in Maryland. And some important facts about his early life. One of his first couple owners, and he went through a couple different owners, about 2 or 3. The wife actually taught him how to read and started to educate Frederick Douglass, which at the time in most southern states was against the law. You were not allowed to teach slaves how to read and write. And the reason being that if they became educated, not only would that be a useful tool for slaves to escape, being able to read signs and literally know where they're going, but part of the reason that slaves are able to stay slaves is if they don't know how bad they have, and if they're educated and they can read up about the world and freedom and everything that's going on, not on their plantation, they'll want to escape. So Frederick Douglass is taught how to read and write, and he's educated at a very early age and continues his own education as the years goes on. There's actually a story from Frederick Douglass's life that he used to hold congregations with slaves on Sundays where they would gather and worship together, but then he would also teach them how to read, and he was actually beaten for this by his owners for teaching other slaves how to read and write, and eventually sold to a slave owner right outside the city of Baltimore. And Frederick Douglass was owned by this man outside the city of Baltimore and did some work inside of Baltimore, and eventually met a woman named Anna Murray, who was a free African-American in Baltimore, whom he fell in love with. And it's around 1838 that Frederick Douglass kind of has a choice to make. He's met this woman, Anna Murray, that he loves. He wants to be with her, but he's enslaved. And there's only one way to make that happen, and that's to escape slavery. Now, what he decides to do, Anna Murray kind of through another friend, develops a plan for Frederick Douglass, or at the time, Frederick Bailey. She had a friend who was in the Navy, the United States Navy, who had free papers and also had a United States Navy uniform. And the plan was to give this and lend it to Frederick Douglass for the time being, let him wear the Navy uniform as a disguise, carry the free papers, and take a train from Baltimore up to Philadelphia, a free state, a free territory where he would most likely be okay. And then he could send for Anna Murray later at a later time. And that's exactly what takes place. Frederick Douglass puts on the Navy disguise, borrows this gentleman's freedom papers, takes a train up to the north, and eventually sends for Anna Murray. And they do eventually get married. They settle in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And he adopts the name Frederick Douglass. And the rest is history, as they say. But we'll actually get into that history a little bit there. It's not too long after Frederick Douglass and his wife settle in Massachusetts that Frederick Douglass begins attending abolitionist meetings where people are speaking out against slavery. And he's just captivated by it, by listening to these people's speeches. And eventually he gets over his shyness and his awkwardness, and he starts speaking out at some of these abolitionist meetings and giving his own voice to the opinion, or to the opinion on slavery. What makes Frederick Douglass's perspective so original and so unique is that he was a former slave, and he was so wildly articulate and intelligent, way more than Northerners had anticipated a slave being, that they were blown away by him. You know, most Northerners who are speaking out against slavery, they can only kind of envision how bad it is, Frederick Douglass can tell them firsthand how bad slavery is, right? He lived through it, and now he can articulate it. And a lot of Northerners are blown away by this. Some are captivated by him, and they realize how big a star he's going to be. And others actually doubt whether or not he was ever even a slave. There are a bunch of people that called into question his background, if he was even a slave. Well, at one of these meetings, these abolitionist meetings, he gets the attention of a man named William Lloyd Garrison, who was probably at the time the most famous abolitionist in the country. And we're talking about the mid to early 1800s in the United States. William Lloyd Garrison was a publisher from Massachusetts who created his own anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator. And he hears Frederick Douglass speak at one of these abolitionist meetings and kind of confronts him afterwards and gives him the whole, like, you're going to be a star, kid, shtick that you see in movies sometimes. But no, in all seriousness, he approaches Frederick Douglass and he's like, look, you have to speak out more. You have to join anti-slavery committees and go around the country with me and speak out in different places. And Frederick Douglass begins to do that. His most famous work around this time is he writes his own autobiography called The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. And he just basically describes his experiences as a slave. Now, when he writes this, he's really afraid that, okay, I have now revealed myself and who I actually am to the entire country. People are going to come looking for me and I might get brought back to my owner. He actually leaves for 2 years and goes to Great Britain and Ireland and does some anti-slavery speaking tours there. Again, because of fear of being, re-persecuted, put back into slavery. Well, it turns out that his book is a smashing success and people all over the country read it and are amazed by Frederick Douglass and literally what he's gone through. And they are so impressed by him and their opinions are so enlightened by him that he returns about 2 years later. And he's almost to the point where he's too big and too famous for people to capture him and put him back into slavery. Like there would be a massive public upheaval if something like that happened. So he comes back and continues to speak out on the subject of slavery. He actually develops his own newspaper called the North Star. And the significance behind that name is a bunch of runaway slaves, or lots of runaway slaves who fled their plantations. One of the ways that they would find their way to the North and eventually to freedom is by following the North Star in the sky. So Frederick Douglass names his anti-slavery newspaper the North Star, right? If you follow the North Star, you'll eventually be free. During the Civil War, he becomes an advisor to Abraham Lincoln. And he tells Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, one of the biggest things that he wants to see get done, other than black suffrage and African Americans, officially being recognized as citizens and getting rid of slavery and having the right to vote. He also wants African Americans to be able to fight during the Civil War. That's something that he really champions hard for. That if the war is in a park and to be fought to have African Americans be free at the end of it, well, then African Americans should help fight for their own freedom, right? They should take stake in that. And Frederick Douglass really, really believed in that. He's one of the driving forces behind the creation of the first all-black regiment that sees combat during the Civil War, and that's the 54th Massachusetts. He's really a big champion for that getting created. After the Civil War, again, he speaks out more again for black suffrage, trying to get African Americans the right to vote, which they eventually do. Under President Benjamin Harrison, he becomes our ambassador to Haiti. Some other significant things about Frederick Douglass: he's the only man to attend the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 for women's rights. He believed in African American rights. He believed in women's rights. He believed in Native Americans' rights. He's just a stand-up kind of guy, to be honest with you, and great head of hair, if I might add myself. He also becomes the first African American man to be on a presidential ballot. And I believe set the 1870s. And he's not even really made aware that he's on this ballot, but he is the first African-American person to be on a presidential ballot. So there's that. That's kind of the abridged version of his life story. But in short, Frederick Douglass is such an amazing, amazing American citizen. He literally escapes from bondage, and instead of just hiding and having freedom kind of to himself, he speaks out on the issue, and he speaks out in a way that nobody before him really could. He has a firsthand eyewitness account of slavery and just how bad it is, and he articulates that to the entire country at the risk of his own personal capture and his own personal persecution. So we really have to take our hats off to him. He's a wonderful role model for American citizens moving forward. So there you have it. There's the life and times of my man, Frederick Douglass. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. Any of that would be just fine. Please remember that history is life. And in the words of George Washington, the surest basis for public happiness is knowledge. So go out there and get some. Have a good night, everybody.